followed my parents' beliefs until I was 12 or 13. I became more naturalistic after that. Then I got involved with the branch of evangelical Christianity. And in my early 20s, I finally decided I needed to challenge my core beliefs and explore from a logical standpoint, could there really be evidence for a God out there? This video is a compilation of 30 years of that search, and I hope you'll appreciate it. When you're done looking at this video, and I know it's a bit long, so you could stop and replay it or come back to it later, whatever, but when you're done, there's a number of videos under our library that are like 3 to 6 minutes long that hit some of the topics and points discussed here and additional other topics and ideas as well. So hopefully you can go look at those later. We should begin with an understanding of how rare it is to have life on a planet in a universe such as ours. A lot of people that look at multiverse theory would suggest that if multiverse is reality, then the vast majority of universes within a multiverse would be sterile. If we look at, I know a lot of us grew up with Carl Sagan, some of us older folks, and we kept hearing him say, with billions and billions of stars in our universe, there must be life out there somewhere, which certainly seemed reasonable to us, but as a mathematician and a statistician, I realize now, from what we know in the 21st century, according to astrophysicists, we don't have nearly enough planets and stars in our universe to really be confident that there will be life elsewhere. The smart money is on no life anywhere else in our universe. So let's talk about why that is. There are now over 500 requirements that astrophysicists have determined are necessary to have a planet that could sustain life long enough so that a species like a Homo sapien could emerge in an advanced technological civilization. So some of those, a lot of the requirements are things that most of us as lay people wouldn't really relate to. Dust in galaxies, ratios of mass to whatever. But here's some things that we can relate to. If any of the 4 fundamental forces, electromagnetism, gravity, strong and weak nuclear force, if any of those were off ever so slightly, we wouldn't have life in this universe. If the weights of electrons and protons weren't precise, we'd either get too many heavy elements or too many light elements. No life would be possible in our universe. Something interesting, it took until about the 9 billion year mark of our universe until we could get supernova in more remote locations of our universe to produce the heaviest elements that we see, which include the radioactive elements. For us to have a planet that can sustain advanced technological life, we need radioactive elements. One, they help with tectonics. Another thing they do is to sustain the liquid iron in the core, the heat in there, so that we could sustain an electromagnetic field. If that electromagnetic field drops, we're going to be sterilized. So radioactive elements and other heavy elements are very important for advanced life. They're necessary. So we can't have a planet in this universe prior to when Earth comes into place that could have advanced carbon-based life forms like us. In addition, fluorine, which is a very important component of proteins on our planet, it takes almost 10 billion years for fluorine to be produced on the surface of a white dwarf special binary star. So that's a rare thing in the universe, and we have it on this planet. Other things, we need 4 giant planets nearby so that as we're going through our orbit at any given place in our orbit, we're not going to get pummeled too frequently by asteroids, comets, and other things flying around. Jupiter just 20 years ago took a hit for the team. It took part of a comet that, wow, if that thing had hit Earth, annihilation. So we need 4 giant planets. That's a requirement. We need the appropriate ratio of water to land. We need a very thin crust, relatively speaking. We need to be in the habitable zone of both our galaxy and our solar system. With regard to our galaxy, the majority of stars have no planets because they're in closer to the center of the galaxy. There's too many forces acting there that are not going to be planets forming. Only 2% of stars, roughly, in our universe have planets. We need a sun that's just right. We need, again, to be in the habitable zone of our solar system, not too close to the sun, not too far away, so in just the right place. And then our moon, we need a very large moon. Our moon is 52 times larger than the mean average ratio of a moon to a planet. Talk about an outlier, this thing's amazing. Now scientists would suggest that, that we don't get this kind of a moon by just grabbing it and putting it in an orbit. We'll talk about how we got that later, but we had to have a collision. We'd have a collision with this moon that tilted us at an ideal 23.5 degree rotation so that we had a wider range of habitable climate on our planet. It slowed us down, otherwise we're spinning too fast, so it gave us a more appropriate spin rate. It broke off and gave us more things like nickel and things to help for ocean life and that sort of thing. And then we were able to capture this other planet that was forming when it collided with us in the middle of space, not too fast, and that became our moon. And that's why we have such a large moon, and we need that for the kind of tidal activity and tectonics that you would need to perpetuate life and prepare a planet for a species such as ourselves. These are just some of the requirements that we need. Now, the probabilities associated with the requirements, over 500 of them, that we need to have a planet that has all these special specifications that we can even have and sustain life on a planet, is about 1 over 10 to the 1100th power. Now, that's a crazy large number. There's only about 10 to the 22nd stars. It's only about maybe 10 to the 21st power planets in our universe. So as far as the lottery goes, we have over only a 10 out of 21 chance of 10 to the 1100th that we have life on a planet in this universe. So the smart money is that there wouldn't be life by random chance in this universe. And I know what some of us intelligent people are thinking. You intelligent folks, it's like, hey, wait a minute, but we're here, so it's a moot point. Not true. That's not smart mathematics. That's not sound mathematics. We need to explore conditional probability, which I'm working up to. So we'll get back to that in a little bit. So don't say that because we're here, we can throw all those odds, all that random probability out the window. It's not appropriate. That's not applying a scientific method or good, strong mathematics. And to go beyond that, then it's all just philosophy. So what the heck? Let's believe in fairies. Anyway, so here we go. In addition to the astrophysics requirements for life on a planet, let's take a look then at biology and genetics and things like that. One of the first things we see on planet Earth are sulfate-reducing bacteria, which for 3 billion years did a great job for us. These little buggers prepared the atmosphere for us. They converted water-soluble elements, which would be poisonous to life, into non-water soluble, which also allows us to mine those resources, have cars and planes and things like that. But these bacteria had little flagellum motors on them, and I know there's big discussions on the internet. People say, hey, this flagellum motor, it's amazing. There's a professor at Harvard that calls it the most amazing motor in the universe. It's basically an outboard motor. It's got all the things that an outboard motor would have. It rotates 100,000 times per minute, can stop in a quarter of a turn and rotate and go the other way. There's 20 components. Michael Behe talks about irreducible complexity, and people argue about this one thing. Hey, can something so amazing really happen due to random chance? Isn't it evidence that there would be a creator, a designer? I would argue that it's evidence for a designer, but you might, on the most remote possibility, be able to say that this one thing might somehow emerge due to crazy random chance. The problem is when you look at science holistically, there's just far too many things, hundreds of things, that all have to happen miraculously to attribute it all to chance. I'm not going to attribute this motor to chance, just like I look up and see a space shuttle or something. I wouldn't attribute that to chance. I would say something really intelligent created that. But the point being, there's so many little things that together make an argument for some miraculous things to happen. In addition, we look at the Cambrian explosion. Again, for 3 billion years, sulfate-reducing bacteria, we have some worms, sponges, things like that, and then there's a lot that happens during the Precambrian and Cambrian time period. It's hard to imagine that large mammals with long gestation periods could evolve, but again, we can get into all sorts of arguments about that. Are there transitional fossils? Are they not? Heard a lot of that. I will recommend a book, Who is Adam by Faz Rana, that Richard Smalley, a chemist who won the Nobel Prize, who formerly was an atheist, said after he read this book and looked at all the more recent information comparing us to hominids, every hominid we've ever found from the past 7 million years, all been dead ends. But the things that are shown in this book of some of the new good research, secular research that's done worldwide, Dr. Smalley said this is something that everybody should read. It's very important. So he left his atheistic ways and believed very strongly that God existed. But the thing I'd really like to point to as far as genetics and biology goes is how did life originate on planet Earth? That is some pretty damning evidence and some important things to look at. There's temperature requirements for the RNA bases to come together. We need uracil and cytosine to come together under very hot conditions and adenine and guanine under very cold conditions. But that's not the big whoop. The big whoop is the base pairs require one thing that assembles in very hot with one thing that assembles in very cold. Well, we've explored possibilities like maybe there's volcanic vents in the ocean where we could get hot and cold so these things could assemble. But we've looked at every natural explanation we can think of up to this point, and it's not just that we suppose it, but that we've ruled them out. So how do you explain the presence of self-replicating material on this planet? Some scientists are saying give us 20 or 30 years, we're looking at protocells. That's no good because protocells already have, theoretically, self-replicating material to them. So it's a big dilemma. We also have a homochirality dilemma. 19 of the 20 amino acids that come together need to be left-handed and the 20th one needs to be right-handed. Earth is not a homochiral planet and never has been apparently, so where did that material come from? In addition to that, again, we have no explanation for how we have self-replicating material. Now, I mentioned this to some students in the past that got and talked to some biologists and said, hey, we can replicate DNA easily. That's not a dilemma. No, that's not what we're talking about. Today, you can replicate DNA, RNA very easily. Heck, 14-year-olds in the backseat of a car can replicate very easily. We're talking about 3.8 billion years ago when this was a hostile planet. No life existed, not a single blade of grass, not a single luxury, nothing here. And so how did we get the RNA to come together? If you don't have self-replication and genetic codes that can be passed on, you can't sustain and perpetuate life. So at this point in time in the 21st century, no natural explanation for how we arrive at self-replicating material. Francis Crick and others have said, look, we have to have had material come from somewhere extraterrestrial. It didn't come about on this planet. It had to be brought here from somewhere else. So in the nearby space, we don't see any sources for that. So then we say, well, what about aliens? Well, recall with astrophysics, and this is why biologists and geneticists have to hold themselves accountable to astrophysicists and the constraints put on us by what we know about the universe. Remember, there's no planets prior to the formation of Earth that have the heaviest elements. There's no carbon-based life out there prior to Earth forming. There can't be in this universe. So we didn't have aliens come here and bring this material here to get us started. Very interesting. I've shared this with people and I've heard, well, there could be other forms of life, like we've been watching Transformers or something. Okay, there could be other forms of life and those aliens brought here. Well, let's think about that logically. Would those life forms travel 3 million years across the galaxies, bring some material that they can't relate to, they have no idea what it is, come and find this hostile planet with no life on it, deposit it here, take a few snapshots, and fly home? Real dilemma. Where does self-replicating material come from? A lot of this argument I'm making is an argument for the fact that there must be something from outside of our space-time dimension that brought that material here. Now, I know I haven't convinced a lot of you on that yet, but that's still to come. Again, we need to get to the conditional probability. What we're looking at now is just the highly unusual possibility that we could have a planet, first and foremost, that could even sustain life, and then we'd have all the just right things happen on this planet, and then we would have self-replicating material somehow make its way here. Very, very far-fetched, without an influence from something from outside of our space-time dimension. Now let's look at a few more things. Let's look at some amazing coincidences. The fact that if we, the moon, for example, it's interesting that the moon, that we collided with the moon, tilted us at an ideal angle, gave us a slower rate of spin, and became an extremely large moon that we need for life, and then it just so happens that the moon is 1/400th the size of the sun and 1/400th the distance to the sun. So that when we get eclipses, the moon perfectly blocks the sun. In the 1800s, that was how we were able to understand the chemical makeup in the universe around us. And then in the early 1900s, when Einstein was able to take measurements that convinced us that the theory of general relativity was correct and that gravity could bend light, etc., we are able to study so much of the universe from the surface of this planet without ever leaving it. We're able to know so much about the past without ever leaving the planet. Why? It just so happens that our moon is the perfect distance and the perfect size to block the sun. In our solar system, there are over 60 other moons. None of them have that characteristic. If we were on any of the other planets, first of all, we wouldn't have been, we couldn't have been, but if we were, we wouldn't have that scenario where we could measure and where we could know things about the universe. Interesting that this planet, which is probably the only one in our universe capable of sustaining life, just happens to have a moon with that characteristic so that we can observe things. And it just so happens that where we're located in our galaxy, we don't have a lot blocking our view. The Hubble has taken pictures going back over 10 billion years into the past where we see the formation of galaxies. We know so much about our universe and can observe so much. The simplicity of certain things also speak to the existence of a highly intelligent God out there that designed things, because when you see a formula like E equals mc squared, very simple, very understandable. Again, we're building an argument, but there's even more, and conditional probability is going to kick in just a little bit. Other ideal things that speak to a compilation, a coordination of things that had to happen. The way that the bacteria broke down our ozone layer, it wouldn't have been what nature would have ordered at the time because of different things and the changing luminosity of the sun over the course of time. But here's the deal. In addition to what the bacteria did and the right timing for life to explode during the Cambrian, if you look at 100,000 year windows, if you look at windows of time over the course of time of Earth, 4.5 billion years, that's 45,000 100,000 year windows. Of all those 40-some thousand windows of time, which would be the best window of time to bring Homo sapiens onto this planet with regard to the steady burning state and luminosity of the sun? The answer, in the last 100,000 years, in this window of time. In addition, according to the spin rate of Earth, what's the perfect time to bring Homo sapiens onto the planet? This 100,000 year window of time out of the 40,000 that we could have chosen from. In the future, the planet will continue to slow down. The temperature variations on the day and night side will be too great. It'll wreak havoc. At some point in the future, this planet would be sterilized. In addition, what's the most ideal 100,000 window of time that you'd bring Homo sapiens on the planet with regard to fossil fuels? Again, it's the time when Homo sapiens showed up, the last 100,000 years or so. So those coincidences are amazing. Those are octillions to one, that those three things would be orchestrated in such a way. Hey, maybe attributed to random chance. But we're starting to build all these random chance ideas, which are pretty crazy. If you took the 10 to the negative 1100 probability that you get a planet, according to astrophysics and chemistry, that's like ours that can sustain life, and now you throw in and say that the bacterial flagellum motor is random chance, that these ideal timings and the time when Homo sapiens come out of the planet is all random chance, throw that all together, now we're starting to approach maybe 10 to the negative 2000th power of all of these things coming together and happening the way that they did. A lot of people can't relate to those kinds of probabilities, so let me just do something that I do with students. I'm thinking of a molecule somewhere in our universe, and it could be 10 billion light years that way, 3 billion light years down, and whatever. It could be any molecule in our universe. In our known universe, there's about 10 to the 80th molecules. Okay, so now you guess the molecule I'm thinking of anywhere. Well, your chance of guessing that molecule would be 1 over 10 to the 80th. Well, when we're talking about all the things from all the branches of science that have to come together for us to have this life on this planet, that would be equivalent to you guessing my molecule about 25 times in a row. It just isn't logical. A lot of people would suggest in the world of science 10 to the negative 100th is considered to be an impossibility. So the idea that random chance can explain why we're here seems very far-fetched, and yet we're still not ready to draw the conclusion using the scientific method. I promised that we had to get to conditional probability. We got to go a step further. We need to venture into the spiritual realm, into philosophy and to religion. There exists a holy book. There's not that many holy books on this planet, but there exists one of the major holy books. It's the Jewish Tanakh. Now, this is the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, basically, but this Jewish Tanakh, which a lot of people have misinterpreted. They've interpreted the Hebrew word yom, that could mean day, as a 24-hour day. The word yom is better translated in context as a period of time. Could be any length of time, could be billions of years. If you were to interpret that Hebrew word yom as a period of time, now all of a sudden we recognize the fact that 3,500 years ago, Moses, or whoever it was that wrote the book of Genesis, is describing basically the universe and the origination of Earth the way scientists know it today. Now, that's pretty crazy. What it tells us was, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was what? It was formless and empty. Right, formless. It took 9.2 billion years for the earth to form. Now, in the book of Job, which is older than 3,500 years old, it talks about the earth being covered in a dense cloud cover. And the implication in this Genesis creation account is that there was a dense cloud cover also. What happened early on earth was you couldn't see the sun and the stars. There would be light, and that would be day. There would be dark, and that would be night, but you wouldn't see the stars. But as the heavy bombardment period comes, and after we collided with the moon and the heavy bombardment period comes, now we get an atmosphere, we get a water cycle like the Genesis account describes, and now we get enough of a breakup in the cloud cover that, oh boy, we can see the sun and the moon and the stars. Now, the verse that the writer of Genesis uses is not to create brand new like the universe was said to be created brand new. It was that those entities, the sun, the star, and the moon, were already in existence, and now we observe them. So it's right in line with dense cloud cover, like this holy book talks about, the breaking up of it, and now we see this. Then it goes on to describe that the earth was covered with water, like we know today that it was, that the landmass came up out of the water. It describes the certain philo that it does mention in the correct order. It describes the earth as being round, not flat. A lot of people say, the Bible says the earth is flat. No, it doesn't. It's said in 700 BC that it was round. In addition, in 2 or more different places in the Jewish Tanakh, this holy book, it describes how God stretched out the universe. But you would have assumed that someone back in the day would have said, well, God stretched out the universe. It's not what these two accounts say. They say that God stretches out the universe, that the universe is still stretching. Well, we've discovered in the last 20 years or so, dark energy or whatever the force is, our universe from the 7 billion year mark on has been stretching at a faster and faster rate. That energy has overcome the gravitational force, and our universe is stretching. So again, this holy book got that scientific detail accurate, that God stretches out the universe. So there's these scientific details that no one could have known about centuries, thousands of years ago. They show up in this holy book. Now that's dumb luck, I guess, if we're going to attribute that to chance. It would tend to suggest that some source from outside of our space-time dimension contacted someone and impressed upon them to write those details. There's other discussions we can have about people say, oh, that law that Moses wrote was nuts, you're killing little kids. No, it was a patriarchal agricultural society. When it discusses about you're to put your children to death who are gluttons and drunkards and who follow other gods, they're adult children. And they're of the age of accountability. And if they go follow these other gods at times, that could wreak havoc on where this tribe ends up or whatever. So again, a whole nother discussion, but let's not take things out of context and make a holy book say something that it doesn't. But in addition, this holy book spells out a planet, gives prophecies and details of the most significant spiritual person that ever lived, and that's Jesus. We would claim the Jewish Messiah. Starting back with Abraham, 2200 BC, it talks about God finding a man on earth who was willing to sacrifice his own son, made a covenant with that man because God, the Father, would allow God the Son to be sacrificed for mankind. So there was a covenant made between God and Abraham, and this is described in 2200 BC. In addition, as the story goes, Abraham told his son, when the son asked, where's the lamb for the sacrifice, he said, God himself will provide the lamb, meaning God would become a man and be sacrificed for us. Now a lot of people say, oh boy, now you're getting into this whole religious thing. Well, stay with me, because this holy book describes so many vivid details of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus that you can't attribute it to chance. And a lot of people in academia have said, wait a minute, this Bible must have been written after Jesus came here, because you can't explain all those details, therefore it must have been written after the fact. We're talking about the Jewish Tanakh. We're talking about a book that was intact well before Jesus ever came to this planet. So to attribute this to random chance, now we start to see where we're going with the conditional probability argument that we're going to wrap up here in just a little bit. So we continue. 2200 BC, Abraham takes his son. He's going to sacrifice him. He says God himself will provide a lamb. At the last minute, God said, don't sacrifice him. There's a ram with its head caught in the thicket, like Jesus with a crown of thorns. But that's where the covenant, according to this holy book, was established with mankind. 1500 BC to get to Moses. You see that the Passover, the story about how the Jews were instructed to find a lamb without blemish, sacrifice it, put the blood on the wooden doorposts, just like eventually the lamb, Jesus, his blood would be put on the doorposts. Ironically, it's the Jews that were crossing themselves before the Catholics ever did. So that was described, and that blood on the wood would cover their sin, would prevent them from a physical death. Well, that's a prototype, a sign of God coming to earth and dying as the sacrificed lamb to prevent us from an eternal death. Again, we'll get more to this later. And so I said, really, you believe in a life after death? Absolutely. We've been contacted by something outside of our space-time dimension. There's another dimension out there, and someone exists there, and if he claims that we're going to end up there, well, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we should believe that. Again, let me continue. So then the practice given to the Jews in the Tanakh was that every year you should appreciate and remind yourselves of the Passover. On the 10th day of Passover, you are to find the lamb, the Passover lamb. The high priest is supposed to bring it into the congregation. They will wave palm branches and say, Hosanna, God save us. On the 14th day of Passover, you sacrifice the Passover lamb. 15th day is a special Sabbath. After you've boiled away the fat, you eat the lamb, da-da-da-da-da. 1500 years later, Jesus comes riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, as prophesied. Your king would ride in Jerusalem on a donkey. He is our high priest, and he's our sacrificed lamb. And in the confusion of the day, maybe 100,000 people start waving their palm branches. It's the 10th day of Passover. The Passover lamb Jesus rides into Jerusalem. When is he sacrificed? When is he crucified? On the 14th day, just like they've been practicing. Why do we know that? They had to take him down off the cross because the next day was a special Sabbath within the Passover celebration. So it's a perfect fulfillment of prophecy. 1000 BC, David writes a vivid eyewitness account of the crucifixion, including saying that they've pierced my hands and feet. He's talking about Jesus, describing a form of capital punishment that hadn't been devised yet. It'd be 200 years before the Persians would devise crucifixion on a cross. So he's describing a form of capital punishment having been invented on planet Earth. And he's saying a band of evil men have encircled them. They've cast lots for his clothing. All this was written in the Jewish Tanakh 1,000 years before Jesus comes. We get to 700 BC. There's a vivid depiction of the crucifixion and the life of Jesus, how he would be killed with criminals, thieves, buried with the rich, a rich man's grave, and he would rise again. There's a betrayal. The betrayal of Jesus is written about 500 years before he came. It's said that the handsome price he priced me, 30 pieces of silver, and he took it and he threw it into the temple to pay the potter. What does that mean? Somebody doing drugs? Well, 500 years later, when Judas betrays Jesus, we understand what happens. Judas is remorseful. He goes back to the high priest in the temple, says, take the 30 pieces of silver back. I don't want it. They won't take it. He throws it into the temple. Eventually, I don't know when, he goes and hangs himself in a potter's field. So they take the 30 pieces of silver, throw it into the temple, and they pay the potter. There are so many vivid details, including where Jesus would be born, when he would be born, and other details about the killing of innocent children, vivid details, and you can't attribute it to chance. It's not dumb luck. So here's the argument. The argument would be this. We know we're here. We know we're here. So what best explains it? Random chance and natural forces alone or the existence of a God. Well, if you're going to go with naturalism, then you have to say that this Jewish Tanakh, with its scientific details centuries before anybody knew these things, was all just dumb luck and random chance. Do you have any idea what the odds against that are? Then you have to say that this Jewish Tanakh, with all the incredibly vivid details of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, were all dumb luck. Again, you're looking at odds that get millions and billions. Dumb luck? And then you have to say, well, if I'm a naturalist, if I'm going to say there is no God and everything can be explained, then when you combine biology, genetics, chemistry, and astrophysics, the probabilities of us having a life on this planet due to random chance and natural forces alone, 10 to the negative 2,000th. It's more ludicrous than believing in fairies with pixie dust putting us here, or leprechauns, or invisible flying elephants. I mean, at that point in time, when you're going to abuse mathematics that badly, you know what? You can believe in anything. You're no longer logical. But here's the dilemma. Here's the conditional probability. So if we can be objective, if we can apply mathematics to this, if we're going to leave math and leave the physical sciences, then it's all philosophy. It doesn't matter anymore. Let's just have discussions and crazy arguments about, hey, what could be or whatever. But if we hold ourselves to the laws of this universe and to mathematical understanding and analysis, then here's the thing. Because we have a holy book, very important, because we have a holy book on this planet that contains things thousands of years before those things were ever known, vivid details that were contained, then that suggests that we've already been contacted by some entity, intelligent, caring entity, from outside of our space-time dimension. That says that something exists out there. So applying Occam's razor to what best explains how we get self-replicating material on this planet for which we have no natural explanation in the year 2013, how we get that is better explained by a force, a source from outside of our space-time dimension. A God exists. It's almost a mathematical certainty. So we have a couple of choices. We can believe in a God where the evidence strongly suggests there is one, or we can believe in random chance and throw logic and common sense and everything else to the wind. That would be the argument for the existence of a God. I'd like to go a little bit further. I want to transition into the spiritual realm and into this plan that looks to be established in the Jewish tradition and then is fulfilled in the Christian doctrine. We needed someone like the Apostle Paul in the first century, who was a very learned Jew, studied in one of the greatest rabbis of all time. He knew this scripture. This is the scripture that he wrote to Timothy and said, it's the scripture that you've been learning since you were a child. This is the inspired scripture, the Old Testament of the New Testament of the Bible. That would be what I would be saying. And I know some of us say, I don't want to believe that Christianity is the only way, because I would never want to follow an exclusive religion, exclusionary. It's not. We're going to find in a moment that according to the Apostle Paul in this plan in the Jewish Tanakh, provisions are made for Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, so don't worry. It's taken care of. You're going to like what you see, and quite frankly, everybody likes Jesus. Who doesn't like Jesus? It's some of his followers that a lot of us can't stand. But we like Jesus. We like his example. And if it's true, like this Jewish Tanakh suggests, that this is God, this is one of the three persons of the Godhead, then this is amazing. This is the kind of God that we want to serve. But now let's clean up this argument, because there's something that stood in my way for a long time, and a question that a lot of people ask. If there's a loving God out there, why is there so much pain and suffering? So I want to address that issue, and then I want to talk about this plan and then wrap it up, and then you're free to go look at some of the other videos on here that deal with all these other issues and more. So here it is. Before we get too philosophical about why is there so much pain and suffering, first let's step back and take a look. We've established through conditional probability this universe appears to be designed. Astrophysicists will tell you that. We should be believing in a God. It's almost a mathematical certainty. There's a God out there, and the God of the Jewish Tanakh, the God of the Bible, like it or not. And so, where was I going? Oh, if you look at the characteristics of this God based upon the universe that he created and the life that he created on this planet, let's stop and take a look. This is a dangerous place. This is a dangerous universe. There is death. There's danger. There's rays, gamma rays, things out there. They'll kill us. There's asteroids. There's floods. There's hurricanes. There's earthquakes. Things will kill us. This is a dangerous place. This God is not a mamby-pamby God. That's not his characteristic. So we need to factor that in. Look at life. We have viruses. We have cancer. We have other diseases. We have beautiful creatures that are very dangerous. If you want to go up and pet a coral snake, probably going to be about the last thing you do on this planet. This is a dangerous place. Nature wants to kill us. So if we look carefully at the attributes of the creation made by this creator, this is not an old God that's just all, give me a hug. This is a God there's some scary attributes. This is a dangerous place. So to say that if there is a God, there shouldn't be any pain and suffering, that's not logical based on what we see everywhere else. But now let's continue with this a little bit. If this was the only life, and I don't believe it is, because he exists outside of our space-time dimension. So he's in a dimension of time. Look at the video on dimensions of time, and I think you'll enjoy what you see on that. Won't take the time to do it right now. But yeah, there's easy to believe in a life after this, and another life, the real life. That makes this life a trial. 120 years or less that we have to reach the conclusion, the right conclusion, to figure things out, to pass the test, and then to enter into the next life. That appears to be what's been set up here. So here's the deal. If this was the only life there was, and there were little kids dying around the planet, and all the bad things that happen to people, that people do to people, I wouldn't serve this God. I didn't care. I wouldn't care if I knew he was there. I would not serve him. But I started to realize years ago, wait a second, if there's another life, if this is just a trial and there's another life, and he needs to get our attention, then I appreciate pain and suffering. I wouldn't be making this video if it wasn't for some horrible things that I've gone through and had to learn at the expense of pain and suffering that got me off my butt. As a mathematician, I can say, and a statistician, the expected value of the number of people that would actually seek and find the right answers increases greatly when pain and suffering is in the equation. So at this point in my life, I would say I would be angry at God and hold him accountable, whatever that means, for not having pain and suffering in this life because less people would make it to the next life. Okay, let's go a step further. Because aren't we bummed out when we understand that 20,000 children at the age of 5 die every day due to starvation or disease, bad drinking water, whatever? 20,000 little kids. Now, a lot of us blame God for that. Well, actually, if every American adult gave about $25 a month to world relief organizations, we could cut that down to 2,000. So let's put the blame where it belongs. About 18,000 kids on our shoulders, 2,000 on God. But nevertheless, we can blame God for those little kids dying. So a couple of things. According to what I read in the Jewish Tanakh and what I understand about tradition, whatever, those kids have not reached an age of accountability. So in God's plan and his justice, those kids have suffered for a while, but where are they going to go? They get to go to the next life. A billionaire who chooses to ignore the trial could leave this life without ever figuring it out. That billionaire, hey, gets 70, 80 years of great living here. That's it. Then there's eternity. Okay, so now the obvious question. Do you really believe that there's a hell? If there's a loving God out there, would he throw people in hell? Absolutely. Again, look at the universe and life that he created. And strangely enough, it's occurred to me in the past that another really bizarre reason for pain and suffering on this planet is to let us know that there is a hell. Think about it. If this God, who was patient and took time to make this planet, this life for us, and he's taken a whole lot more time and care to make another life in the future, if he's willing to sit here and watch a 3-year-old in some third world country die all alone of starvation, you don't think he'd throw you into hell? Of course he would. So a strange benefit of pain and suffering is for us to realize we're not messing around. We can't ignore the fact that there must be a God out there. And you can't ignore the fact that the Jewish Tanakh is the holy book through which he has communicated with us. and he has a plan. So let's wrap this up about talking about the plan, what the requirement is, how we make it into this life after death, and how there's a provision for other people who are not Christian to make it to heaven. We'll call it heaven. And here it is. If you look at this plan, when the Apostle Paul referred to the words of Jesus as he was dying on the cross, he's dying on the cross, and at one point he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And a lot of people who are non-believers would say, what a stupid holy book. You just have your entity. He's your Messiah, and he's saying, what, on the cross? He's a fraud. Here's the deal. The Apostle Paul directs us, or he doesn't really direct us. We have to go find it. In the 22nd Psalm, written 1,000 years before Jesus was crucified, David started out the psalm saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? As you read this psalm, David seems to be talking in the first person about himself, but you realize he's not talking about himself. He's talking about the crucifixion 1,000 years later, and Jesus will be saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? And my hands and feet are pierced. They cast lots for my clothing. An evil band of men have surrounded me. Da-da-da-da-da-da. And there's all sorts of other, again, references to his crucifixion, he being pierced and whatever. Also that his bones wouldn't be broken. He had already died from the abuse that he took before they hung him on the cross. They didn't have to break his legs so that he wouldn't be able to push up and breathe. He had already suffocated. That's why they pierced him. Prophecies about him being pierced or whatever. Moses and David talk about his bones wouldn't be broken, and they weren't. But so here's the deal. My God, why have you forsaken me? The Apostle Paul, this brilliant Jew, who his conversion from persecuting the early church, he thought Jesus and his followers were heretics. He was rounding them up, throwing them in jail, holding the coats of people that were stoning martyrs to death. He was rounding up Christians and killing them. But he had a 180 experience. He claims to have met Jesus on the road to Damascus. So he becomes the greatest proponent and our best instructor for doctrine based on the Jewish Tanakh, the Old Testament. So what does he say? Takes us back to a little part of the law in Deuteronomy, where God established that anybody convicted of a capital offense who hangs on a pole, or some translation says hangs on a tree, is cursed. So what happened was God had a plan. In the New Testament, Paul says this plan occurred before time began. The plan was, from before he even created the universe, that he would come to the earth, he would have to hang on a cross, be cursed with everyone's sins, and it's his blood that would pave the way to heaven. So that's what this really intelligent scholar tells us in interpreting the Jewish Tanakh and all these prophecies, starting with Abraham, and how it was very clear what would have to happen. So here's the deal. Basically, the notion is this. When Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, the life, no man comes to the Father but by me, a lot of people say, again, that's exclusionary. It's Christianity or nothing. I don't want to believe in that. Well, I don't really want to believe in that either. But thankfully, if you look at that more carefully, here's what it means. God instructed Moses in 1500 BC when they had the tabernacle to build a replica of what was going on in heaven. That in heaven there was an actual mercy seat where eventually Jesus' blood would be poured. When that blood went on that mercy seat, when that sacrifice was fulfilled, then that made a way for any human being to make it to the next life. It was always God's plan that he would be the one to pave the way. So Paul in the book of Romans talks about people around the world who haven't heard this gospel of Jesus Christ. And he says that they'll be judged on the way they follow the leading of their heart, really through the Holy Spirit, the third part of the Godhead, the third personality of God. Even the Jews unwittingly believe that God is multiple, because in the Genesis account it said, let us make man in our image. So even though most of us think that it's it's one God, it's really three persons. Okay, so here's the deal. Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. So no one comes to the Father God but through him the Son. It's only the sprinkling of God's blood that gets us there. So the Apostle Paul says that those people around the globe that don't hear the gospel, they'll be judged by how they follow their heart. That's fair. And they'll be welcomed into eternal life. But even they, how will they be allowed to enter? In this universe, it's the blood of God that gets us there. That punches our ticket. So, it's not exclusionary, and Jesus' words are accurate. He's the only way to the Father. It's through his blood. It's through this plan that was established before the universe was even created. So we like this Jesus. You look at the attributes of him. That, we would argue, is God. How did he treat people? Beautifully. That's our God. Scary. Did some really scary stuff at time, and his judgments. So we should fear this God. But in this world, the reality is we have a holy book. We've been contacted from somebody from outside of our space-time dimension. He lines up a very explicit plan. And so, hey, let's hang out with our Muslim brothers and sisters and Hindus, and let's celebrate this prophet that the Muslims believe in, and let's talk about it more carefully, and let's reason together. And let's say, hey, you know what? This is the way. God's blood, that's the door that gets us there. That's a good economy as far as eternal life goes, because how do we get to heaven? We don't earn it. We don't earn it. God makes the way. It's through grace. So when we do our acts of love out of obedience to him, it should be without strings attached. We don't have to earn anything. It's already been paid for. So the final thing I'd like to leave us with is this. There's a lot of preconceived notions that we bring to the table when we have discussions like this. One is that you could explain everything naturally, you don't need a God. We've seen that that's not true. The odds are way against any natural explanation. Another is that people interpret the Bible as saying that the earth is 6,000 years old. That's a misinterpretation of the Hebrew word yom in that context, and the Bible then lines up perfectly with history throughout from what we see. There's other assumptions we make that if I'm just a good person, I can make it to the afterlife. Wouldn't bet your life on that, because that's not what this plan describes. God would be an idiot if he came to life and suffered like he did, got whipped and beaten and hung on a cross. That'd be a pretty dumb God if it wasn't necessary. Another one is, if God is so loving, there's no way he'd throw anybody into hell. Again, that's a misunderstanding. Look at the universe, look at life, look at what God is like, and he'll throw people into hell. Absolutely. And then the very last thing I would leave you with is this. Pain and suffering, again, there's one last idea that I forgot to cover, and it's this. If you were 20 years old and you were dying of a terminal disease, but there was a shot that you could take that would clear that up and return you to an expected life of 80 years, it would give you 60 years more of life or whatever, would you accept that brief moment of pain, that shot that would give you 10 seconds of pain, so that you could extend your life? Well, when we look at the concept of pain and suffering in this life, in the context of the next life, that's the analogy to be made. We're going to live here for less than 120 years. The pain and suffering that we endure, which can be horrible, and I'm not belittling it in any way, shape, or form. But in the context of eternity, it's a very brief moment of pain. And I would never say to anybody who's been through a traumatic, horrible, evil experience that everything happens for a reason. I think that's one of the craziest expressions. All things work together for good, but I don't think necessarily we should say that anyone was singled out to say, oh, you deserve for that to have happened. I don't think that's good Tanakh, good Bible. I don't think that's the nature of God. This world and universe was set up allowing men and women a free will, and we have done horrible things to people. And be careful, just be careful with your Christianity or any religion to walk too far away from holding yourselves accountable to reality, i.e. the universe is 13.7 billion years old, not 6,000 years old. It's very dangerous when we get into a mindset where we encourage our followers to not trust reality and scientific data and to believe whatever people tell us to believe about our holy book. We have a rich history of horrible things done to others when that has occurred. So be very careful. Hold ourselves accountable, us who are in the Christian faith. Please hold yourselves accountable to reality. Get into that holy book. It's amazing. And while others say, well, see, religion is bad, look at all the lives it took. Yeah, like naturalism is better. When you take God out of the picture, then you get Joseph Stalin and Chairman Mao. So I don't think that's a logical argument either. All right, I've talked for a long time. This is the essence of the discussion. If we are to make it to the next life, It's through God's blood and God's blood alone. There's nothing you can do to earn it. So I would encourage you to discover more about this plan, this God, or whatever. We have one life to decide. It's up to you. There is a heaven. There is a hell. Mathematically, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Godspeed for you and your loved ones.